Well, as you listen to this morning's gospel reading, I imagine there were several among you who may have thought, wait a minute, those aren't the Beatitudes I remember. And you're right. If you're familiar with the Beatitudes, you're most likely familiar with the version from the Gospel of Matthew, not the Gospel of Luke. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about the differences between these two versions and why the gospel writers may have offered up two different accounts, but I'll save that for another day. Instead, today I'll talk to you only about the obvious differences. But before I do that, we need to be clear about what is meant by the word blessed. Ask most Bible scholars, and they will tell you that the Greek word that's translated as blessed in our text means happy. But that's kind of misleading. Jesus isn't telling his audience that they need to put on a happy face. He's not saying they should be happy that they're poor or hungry or persecuted. Bible scholar Matt Skinner says a better translation of the word would be satisfied, unburdened, or at peace. You can't be happy while you're weeping or being mistreated, but you can be at peace with your circumstances, even in the midst of the tears. Luke follows up the Beatitudes with a set of parallel woes. And woes in this context doesn't mean that the person is judged or condemned. Jesus isn't saying people who are laughing are condemned. He himself would be accused of eating and drinking too much and having way too good of a time. Woe can instead be translated as a word of warning to those who are privileged. And so Luke confers a blessing on everyone who finds themselves struggling, while offering up a word of warning to those who are privileged. This may not sound so strange to you, but it would have been a radical teaching to the first century Jewish audience, because it was believed that privilege and good fortune was a gift from God for faithful living, whereas unfortunate circumstances were punishment for a person's sin. Come to think of it, that's a concept that's pretty widespread today, too. When something bad happens to us, we cry out, what did I do to deserve this? And we tend to believe that our good fortune is a reward for our faithfulness. But the Jesus of Luke's gospel says in God's dominion, everything is reversed. The weak are lifted up and the powerful are brought down. It's a theme that repeats itself throughout that gospel. For example, Luke is the only gospel which describes the lowly shepherds as being honored to be the first ones to receive the news of Jesus' birth. And it's in Luke's gospel that we hear in Mary's Magnificat the proclamation that God brings down the powerful from their thrones and lifts up the lowly. God, she declares, fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich away empty. And it's in Luke that Jesus preaches an inaugural sermon taken from a text that proclaimed release to the captives and freedom for the oppressed. Luke wants his audience to understand that Jesus' arrival on the scene is the advent of a new day, a day of glad tidings for everyone, but especially for those who are feeling crushed down by poverty, hunger, and grief. And whereas Matthew presents Jesus up on a mountain, looking down upon the crowds, bestowing upon them beatitudes, Luke says he came down with them and stood on a level place. In Luke's gospel, then, everyone is standing on equal footing. The rich and the poor, the Jew and the Gentile, those whose bellies are full and those who feel the pangs of hunger. And if there's a message in today's text, I believe it is this: there is no room for privilege in God's dominion. We all stand on equal footing. Those who are hungry now need to be fed by those who have food to spare. And those who are persecuted need to have allies in those who are popular. And those who are standing on mountains need to come down from their mountains and stand on a level place so they can look their neighbor in the eye. If you mistakenly suppose that when Jesus offers words of warning to the rich, he's not speaking to you, then you may want to consider the fact that a salary of $25,000 places you in the top 2% of the richest people in the world. And if you think you've been blessed because of your income, Jesus says in this morning's text that you're actually being forewarned about it. There's no question. This morning's text is a difficult one, which offers blessings to the poor, not the poor in spirit. Blessings to those who are hungry, not a metaphor for those who are hungry for the presence of God or the Eucharist or peace on earth. Just plain hungry, unable to find enough to eat. Jesus blesses those who weep, not about your sinfulness or the many sorrows of the world, just weeping, the comfortless sobbing out of loss or illness or maltreatment or death. Jesus takes the nice music away. Luke's Jesus takes the nice music away. You know, the kind that makes the Beatitudes feel smooth and lovely. He gets out a brush and broom and whisks away the glitter of Matthew's Beatitudes. Quite frankly, Luke's Beatitudes are harder to hear and tougher to chew on than those in Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. If any of this unnerves you, then you're in good company. I find it to be a bit unsettling too. And that's why at this church, I've tried to level out the playing field. People who live under the stigma of HIV are given a helping hand up with extra food, support groups, and financial assistance. Those who are lucky enough to have a roof over our heads are invited to give $1 a week toward those who aren't as fortunate as we are. Next week, we'll be given an opportunity to educate ourselves about a history that isn't taught in our schools. We'll watch a documentary about Black history. And today after worship, we will begin a period of discernment about how we can level the playing field for immigrants and refugees in our country. In this morning's text, Jesus levels out the playing field, both literally when he teaches people on the level place rather than from a mountaintop, and he does it figuratively when he speaks words of blessing to the marginalized and words of warning to the privileged. Our church works toward leveling things out with its programs and outreach to the HIV community, people of color, the transgender population, and immigrants. So the question for each of us to consider is, how will we level things out for others? How will we work toward making the dominion of God a reality? What needs to change in our personal attitudes or in our daily lives for this sort of thing to happen? It's a question that each of us needs to ask ourselves, and thoughts and prayers aren't the answer. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines woke as aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues, especially in the area of social justice. And Congresswoman Barbara Lee says, "We have a moral obligation to stay woke, take a stand and be active, challenging injustices and racism in our communities and fighting hatred and discrimination wherever it rises." That's what I think Jesus is saying in this morning's text. He's saying to stay woke. Step outside your bubble. Look your neighbor in the eye and see if there's a way that you can level the playing field. Amen.